So without further ado, I will hand off to my colleague, Julia Bailey, who will introduce our speaker today. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Jean, and greetings, everyone. On behalf of the New England Rug Society, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, speaking to us from Istanbul, Deniz Coşkun. While still in college, Deniz pursued a parallel education in carpets. And having completed an MBA degree, he instead followed his dream of specializing in nomadic, semi-nomadic, and village weaving of Anatolia, which included living among Turkmen tribes of the Taurus Mountains. He's now a frequent speaker at international textile events and organizes cultural tours and textile-oriented walking and hiking adventures in Anatolia. Today, Deniz will talk about Turkmen history in Anatolia, specifically as it bears on certain arresting kilims from the province of Antalya. Although collectors and connoisseurs have previously assigned these kilims to Varsak, Deniz's fieldwork engagingly refutes this attribution. So now, from wherever you are, please join Jean and me in welcoming our speaker, Deniz Coşkun. Over to you, Deniz.
Well, hello, everybody. Greetings from Istanbul. Today, I will try to explain you a journey of a Turkmen tribe who wore these wonderful so-called Varsak Kilims, but the attribution was mistakenly said Varsak, and we will pass over the history and the Kilims themselves. But first of all, let me thank the New England Rug Society for providing this opportunity to join you in this webinar, and hope we will have a great webinar together. So let me just begin. So we will unravel, if you want, so-called Varsak Kilims, if they are really belonging to Varsak or not, but we should maybe examine the Varsak Kilims in a more historical and technical way. So this is an early example of a so-called Varsak Kilim with specific properties, color range, a limited color range with reds, blues, whites, and green in some early examples. And as a fingerprint, we have these little diamond shapes, generally scattered in a diagonal position on these kilims. But we should, in the beginning, look at Turkmens in a historical perspective. So who are Turkmens, where they come from? So this is the Turkic world, a very shortened version of the Turkic world. We separate the Turkic world into two. The Kipchaks on the right-hand side. So the Kipchaks are the grandparents of the people living now in the countries named Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uyghurs living in the Chinese territory. The Western Turks, called Oghuz or Turkmen, form the basis of the population living in Turkey, Turkmenistan, Iran, Azerbaijan, Iraq, Syria, Balkans, and Cyprus. And we, the Western Turks, the Oghuz, the Turkmen, have a common dialect, so we can understand each other very easily without any problem, which creates a cultural advantage. So this is the Anatolian map of the 13th century, where the Turkmen tribes and principalities settled to the land. Interestingly, the Turkmen, first appearance of them occurred in the late 11th century. In 1071, they won a war called the War of Manzikert, and advance till the western edge of the map and reach the Aegean sides in only 1 century, and were able to to establish their political entities as principalities that you can see in a very short time. So how did it happen? We have here Trabzon, Greek Pontiac kingdom, and then we will see Armenian kingdom in the south, but the area is mainly covered by Turkmen tribes. So why and how did it form? So in the medieval times, the majority of people were living in citadels. Within the city walls of citadels, they were secure and safe. And out of the citadels, the land was vast and empty, basically, because lacking the security, people wouldn't have any tasks or daily actions in those empty lands. So Turkmen, first time arrived in Anatolia, used this property as an advantage to graze their huge flocks of sheep and goats and advance through the land like there has been nothing, no obstacle for them to reach the Aegean Sea within 1 century only. So this is the advantage of the medieval lifestyle, procuring them somehow a huge empty grazing land, and by this way they reached the west side of the country and established their principalities or political establishment in a very quick interval of time. So I put this map of the 11th century Anatolia to show you the distances between the main cities and the emptiness in between them. Here on the upper left-hand side, you have the Constantinople as a reference point, and you have Ankara, Amasya, Sivas, Malatya, and you can see the distance between two main cities with a big emptiness, which was a very good advantage for Turkmen to live there as nomads. And basically there was no conflict of interest, if you want, with the settled ones who live, non-Turks, who live in the boundaries of the citadels. So there was no difficulty for the Turkmen tribes to advance through the deep valleys and vast plains of Anatolia. Here is a very interesting map, a Catalan map of Anatolia drawn in 1375 and showing several flags of different groups, different political establishments. The ones I encircled are maybe the most important ones. We have always Istanbul as a reference point, and on the upper left side, we have the Byzantine flag. On the upper right-hand side, we have the Karamanid flag around Sivas, and on our subjected area, the prospective area, we have on the south west corner of the map, we have the Hamid flag as a Turkmen principality. We have the Pontiac Greek kingdom in the upper right-hand side towards the corner, and towards the bottom on the southeast corner of the map, we have the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia. And interestingly, the Seljuk Sultan is drawn as a sitting king. I think this depicting form is taken from Seljuk palace tiles, and it's a very similar one to the ones who are drawn or described on the Seljuk palace tiles, which are used in the walls. So for that time, we had no photo cameras, so this is one of the earliest pictures describing Turkmen. So this is an Akkoyunlu Turkmen wedding prosecution. And this is one of the earliest versions of Turkmen depicted for the first time. So we have a terminological difference. What is Yörük? What is Turkmen? It is the same thing or not? So this is a little bit tricky or intriguing in minds of people who are especially related to the Anatolian carpets. So basically, it is a historical terminology difference. So Yörüks are the ones who passed to the west of the Red River as a border and established their political, let's say, entities towards the 14th century. And the Turkmens are the ones who remained in the eastern part of the Red River and established their steady political formations towards the 16th century. And generally, Turkmens are supporters of Safavids. So towards the end of the 15th century, we have important happenings occurred in Anatolian land historically, which changed the life of Turkmens and Yörüks, so the nomadic Turkic people living in Anatolia at those times. And we will examine these historical changes who affected Turkmens and who also led our subject group from Sivas to Antalya. So first of all, Tamerlane had a victory over Ottomans in 1402, and Ottoman dynasty risked to be eradicated forever. And interestingly, Yörüks and Turkmens, so the nomadic Turkic people living in Turkey at those times, or living in Anatolia, supported Tamerlane, thinking that Tamerlane has a similar nomadic lifestyle, so they would be supported by Timurids or Tamerlane and maybe would be protected by him. So they supported, helped Tamerlane, but for this reason, they have perceived as betrayers by the Ottoman dynasty, which led to some political restrictions and pressures over them. Then, interestingly, a very fast re-triumph of Ottomans we see, leading the Ottomans to the conquest of Constantinople, which changed tremendously the history of the whole world. And then from that point, the Ottomans were an empire, not a simple state. Then it led to the increase of taxations over Yörüks and Turkmens, an increase of pressure over them to make them settled forcibly. And for this reason, Ottomans divided bigger groups into smaller portions and just put them distant to each other to break their political and military power. They relocated them, they sent them away from different parts of the same tribe, and then they set new regroupings, political alliances of those nomadic Turkic people to again limit their political power over the land. So we're talking about Ulu Yörük of Anatolia. Ulu Yörüks are a Turkmen group who ended up settling in the northern part of Antalya and who wove our subject, the Kilims. And the first appearance of Ulu Yörük subtribes occurred in 1250 in the Ilkhanid Mongol conquest of Anatolia. They have a very heavy Mongol effect due to the Mongol-originated tribes like Chungar, Sungur, Samagar, and so on. And they have been ruled by 3 Mongol states and 1 Turkish state. Ilkhanid's Eretna and Kadıburhanettin was Mongol-originated principalities, and Ottomans are Turks, ruled over the Ulu Yörük nomads. So the first documentation of Ulu Yörüks by Ottomans occurred in 1455. They have been taxed for the first time, and after that period, they have been taxed regularly, and we see the name of Ulu Yörük very often in Ottoman taxation books, so we can follow up their their advancements through the Anatolian plain. So this is the map of Uyghur movement in Anatolia. So in the 14th century or in the 1400, they were around Tokat. In 1460, we see them moved to Ankara. And then by passing through Balıkesir and Kütahya, a very small group of them ended up by having a settled village life in the north of Antalya on the southwest Anatolia in 1550s. So this is the geographical spread of Uyghur population in Anatolia. So 86% lived in Sivas, 10% lived in Ankara, and only 4%, which is our subject people, lived around the north of Antalya. And this is their advancement. So 86 in Sivas, from which 10 moved to Ankara, from which 4% had first time settled in the north part of Antalya, in the villages that we found these kilims that we are talking about. So we are basically talking about the Korkuteli district of Antalya. This is the close-up map of Korkuteli. The villages that I colored with the yellow are the ones I encountered in Ottoman taxation books having the subtribe names given to the villages. And the ones encircled with the red is where we went to have a field research about the identity of those kilims. So let's talk about the tribal identity of the Uyghur of Antalya. So each village name comes from the subtribe name registered in the Ottoman taxation books. But interestingly, the inhabitants forgot the subtribal name, so they're not aware of the subtribe name being same as the village name. So the villagers do not know their tribal identity, but interestingly, these tribal people interact much more intensively with each other compared to the other villages. So the intermarriages, the trade activities, the friendship go much more intensively between those villages who, if you want, belong to the same tribal identity without the villagers or inhabitants being aware of their tribal name. But interestingly, the awareness of the villagers of Uyghur in the tribal identity even do not exist. They share a very concrete culture, and the kilims are one of the example and the representative object of the tribal identity belonging to Uyghur. So we had a problem in order to begin our field research. This problem, if you want, pushed us towards making this study because those kilims that we will see the examples are generally known as Varsak Kilims of Antalya. But with some friends, we realized that Varsak Kilims, Varsak tribal kilims, if you want, coming from different corners of Antalya, were not having the same properties of the Antalya ones. And only the Antalya ones were very different compared to the other Varsak kilims, which are very similar to each other. So in order to resolve this problem, we felt the obligation to be sure if those kilims coming from Antalya are in fact really Varsak ones or are belonging to another tribal identity. For this reason, we should identify the Varsak and their kilims, and then we went to Antalya Korkuteli district to have a field research, and then compared the results and made our outcome out of these results. So this is our team. Öznur Tanal is a lady working for Antalya Greater Municipality as a social anthropologist. Michael Bischoff was a carpet specialist working over Anatolian carpets for more than 40 years, and he is an academician about natural dyes. Unfortunately, we lost him last year. Sonny Bersan was specialized on Anatolian village weavings and is one of the most knowledgeable people about local Anatolian village carpets and kilims. Unfortunately, we lost them 3 years ago, and me as part of the team. And we had a secondary team in the area. Hakan Tayzacan was a lecturer and also pretty much identifying these kilims. Unfortunately, we lost them during the COVID period. Musa Kaynar is a carpet dealer, very knowledgeable and coming from the area. Hasan Akdemir is a very interesting personality. He is the picker of Antalya. So he collects kilims directly from the villagers. He's a villager at the same time, but the main property of Hasan Akdemir, he is coming from the Varsak tribe. So he was important for us, and the information given by him was very valuable for our study. So let's identify who the Varsak are. Varsak Turkmen were a confederation of 7 sub-tribes, and the Varsak identity is first time seen in Memluk documents because some of Varsak sub-tribes have their winter quarters in the Memluk territory in Syria. Varsak in Anatolia live in Western Turkey, Aydın, Southern Turkey like Silifke, Adana, Karaman, and Kayseri, Konya, Sivas, all included in the south, in the central part of Turkey. Northern Antalya is our focus area. So there are 2 little settlements of Varsak tribe in Antalya, and they form the Karaman Principality with the political alliance with Afshars and Bayat, the very 2 big sub-tribes of Oghuz Turks. So in Antalya, as I said, Varsak had 2 settlements, one near the city center close to the seaside, so used during the winter time by the tribes people, and the Varsak pasture, Yayla Varsak, is high altitude and located next to the village where those kilims come from, and also neighboring Yeleme village populated by Circassians. Interestingly, the kilims that we will see from time to time are, let's say, attributed to the Circassians by another mistake. We will examine this also. So this is the Varsak map. You see them living in the Western Turkey, in the Central Turkey, and in Southwest as 2 villages that I talked about, placed in Antalya. And the one I marked with an arrow is neighboring our focus area as the wrongly Varsak Kilim name comes. So these are the Varsak Kilims coming from the other corners of the Anatolian peninsula. The very left-hand side is coming from Aydın. The central left one comes from Konya. The central right one comes from Kayseri, and the right one comes from Adana. So these kilims have a consistency over the pattern vocabulary, if you want. They have all diamonds or hexagons placed on top of each other and added by ram's horns horizontally towards the right-hand side and the left-hand side. This is more or less what is a Varsak Kilim coming from the other corners of Turkey. And this is, interestingly, a so-called Varsak Kilim coming from Antalya. So this is the problem. We thought they should not be related to each other, neither historically or technical wise too. This is one of the good representative of Varsak or so-called Varsak, with diamonds put in a diagonal position to each other as one of the representative properties of these kilims. And maybe some of those kilims belong to some of you. Because these kilims are very rare, we had a difficulty to find the pictures of the representative examples of Varsak kilims, and we might lack the attribution of those kilims to the actual owners. Sorry for that. So this is the one belong to Marcel Fink, having a very representative property, limited colors, and again, diamonds put in the diagonal position to each other. This is owned by Recep Sefer, a very reputable Turkish carpet collector, and belonging to mid to late 19th century. This is an early example, early to mid 19th century. This is a close-up of a very large Varsak Kilim, again dated to early to mid 19th century. This is the whole kilim, having the former slide one as the central point of the kilim, as a medallion. This is another one coming from the area, belonging to late 19th. This is early to mid 19th century, again coming from the same region. This is a very typical one, having diamonds put in a diagonal position to each other. And one of the common properties of Varsak Kilims is each diamond is encircled with a contour, if you want, based on two warps. So these white diamonds are just encircled with some edging colors based or woven on two warps. This is one of the common properties of those kilims, as you see in this one. So this is maybe one of the latest so-called Varsak kilims woven in an authentic pattern. And this is our team making a field research. Some memories of the field research in enjoyable times in different villages. So what we did basically is showing those pictures to the weaver ladies and some elder men too, because their mothers were weaving those kilims. And we tried to understand if they recognize those patterns or those kilims, and whether they attribute those kilim patterns into specific villages around the area or not. This is a very important picture. This is when Özmür first time encountered the name of Alafaredin, which is the old name of one important village where 90% of these kilims come from. And those weaving ladies immediately recognize the place or the pictures, the designs, and attribute them to Küçükköy, the little village. The translation of Küçükköy in Turkish is the little village. We will just go in details. again, some pictures of the field research. So if you want, let's observe the sociocultural and natural environment in which those kilims are woven. These people are semi-sedentary. If you want, I will try to explain you very shortly the three different clusters of the nomadism around the Mediterranean basin. So we divide nomadism into three clusters, and the first cluster is full nomadism, where people live in tents and generally are feeding big flocks of sheep and goats and are going to seek some fresh graze without any specific place. So they are wandering around a limited area and they don't have fixed or historically inherited pastures. Whereas in semi-nomad lifestyle, we have people living in tents again, but having two different places, the winter quarter and the summer quarter, generally distant to each other with different altitudes. So in the summer times, they go up to the mountains to find the fresh graze. And in the winter time, they go down to the depth of valleys to benefit from the good weather. And if the case is lived in houses, so two villages having the same people migrating seasonally and living 6 months on the village in the high altitude and living 6 months during the winter time on the low altitude village, we call this semi-sedentary lifestyle. So these people have semi-sedentary lifestyle, 6 months of living in upland and 6 months on the lowland, always in houses and with tents or rarely in tents. They have big looms that we will see. So these kilims cannot be considered nomadic, may be considered as tribal, but they're not nomadic kilims. And these areas are really arid. So animal husbandry, especially sheep and goat husbandry, was their priority or their primary activity for making the daily bread. And they have now a very heavy agricultural lifestyle after the state irrigation arrived at the area. So they make now farming mostly as a life source. They practice Alevi and Sunni belief as same as the authentic area, Sivas area, where they came from 500 years ago. So this is an interesting picture taken in those villages outskirts. This is maybe a remaining activity from 500 years ago. For some limited time, let's say some weeks, not every family, but some family go up to the mountains with a tent, with a nomadic tent, and pass only several weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, to make their animal graze in a better position. And this is maybe a remaining of their 500. So this is the mountains they live in for a couple of weeks in a limited period. And this is one of the nomadic activities rarely seen in the area. They have here in this picture mainly goats, and the area is higher than 6,000 feet or 2,000 meters. This is an authentic house they live in. So basically the houses are more or less like this. The walls are from mud and stone, and the ceilings and the beams are from juniper tree, which is very durable and which resists to the harsh conditions. You can see. This is a relatively newer house belonging to the same people. And there's an interesting picture. This is the last version of a Alafaridin kilim. So the kilims on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side, I recognized by the people who wove the new one in the middle. When we asked them, why do you change the pattern so much? They said, this is the kilim woven, the old versions are the ones woven by our mothers, and this is not trendy anymore, so we upgraded, they say, our kilims, and this is what they weave in these days as a continuation of the same tradition, but having a totally different graphic design, if you want. So this is a loom belonging to one of the old weaver ladies. So in these houses, a room is dedicated to the weaving activities, and a huge loom covers the majority of the room. So it is obviously not a nomadic loom, if you will. So here are the results of our field research. A simple, very simple statistic study about the attribution of the kilim patterns to certain village. So the names that you see are mostly female weaving ladies. So they all wove kilims, and in their childhood, they wove these patterns. So this kilims belongs to Küçükköy for 8 people questioned. This very old one is again recognized by 8 people that we asked the question to Küçükköy. This is also recognized by them. 8 of them said it is coming from Küçükköy. So the Küçükköy is Uluyörük populated one. This is only recognized by 2 of them, but still being attributed in Küçükköy. Again, this one, a very classical one for us carpet collectors, has been only recognized by 5 of them, again attributed to Küçükköy. When we show this picture to them, they all say, oh, you know this lady, this is from our village, so this is a Küçükköy kilim again. And we have an interesting small case of Yeleme village. So interestingly, in the market, these kilims are from time to time mentioned as Circassian kilims. So who are the Circassians? The Circassians are an ethnicity, a people living in Circassia, northern part of Caucasus. And when Russia invaded the Caucasia in the towards the end of the 19th century, they took refuge in many places in Turkey, in Anatolia, in Ottoman land, and some of them ended up settling in Yeleme village. So here is what we have found about Yeleme. Hakan Tazacan, the dealer that we got the feedback about those kilims, said that the pictures that we have in our hands are mostly coming from the Yeleme village kilim inventory. You know, in Anatolia, in Turkey, there is a heavy tradition to donate the kilims to the mosques. So those kilims were donated to Yeleme mosque, but Yeleme villagers say that they came to the area in 1867, where the mosque was already there with the kilims in. So they didn't weave, they don't have a kilim weaving tradition, but they owe these kilims, if you want, by coincidence when they settled there. So again, Circassians are a Northwest Caucasian ethnic group, lived in the North Caucasus until the invasion of Russia to the land. And Varsak pasture, the same Varsak pasture who gave mistakenly its name to these kilims. So in order to be sure Varsak people do not weave these kilims, we went there and we investigated people, because it might be very well the case that those kilims, the same patterns, might be woven by Varsak too. So interestingly, the majority of villagers said that they had never had a kilim weaving tradition already, which was pretty shocking for us. And there was one exception. Mehmet, the grocer of the village, told about his grandmother's kilim, and his grandmother had a kilim inherited and woven by her grandmother with a different kilim pattern that Mehmet describes as like diamonds located to each other on top of each other consecutively, and ram horse are going out of these diamonds towards the right-hand side and the left-hand side. And this is more or less what we have as a typical Varsak Kilim vocabulary coming from the other places in Turkey. So he is describing the right thing as the Varsak Kilim pattern, but nothing to do with the kilims that we focused on. And Hasan Akdemir, the picker, coming from Varsak village and Varsak tribe, said that he had never collected our focused kilim group from Varsak village, but Küçükköy, Büyükköy, and Takkesi and Kırkpınar village, which belonged to the Uluyörük tribe, Ali Fahrettin sub-tribe. So the results of this field study, joined with the observation of the Ottoman taxation books and the heavy research on the market, whether the information is right or wrong, we just encircled the whole information that we could have from these three main places: market, Ottoman documentation, and field research, and we ended up with these results. So so-called Varsak Kilims have no historical and geographical bonds with the Varsak tribe. And the subject Kilims all come from Küçükköy and maybe Yeleme, where the mosque was, and belonging to Ali Fahrettin subtribe of Uluyörük. The old name of Küçükköy village was Ali Fahrettin Sagir, meaning Little Ali Fahrettin in Arabic. So the villagers made a spoiled term to describe their village and their kilim. This is Alafaredin. They named their village and their kilim Alafaredin village and Alafaredin kilim, which leads to the name of their tribal, sub-tribal name. But they forget that they were once a sub-tribe of Uluyörük. So the Varsak people deny this subject kilim group belonging to themselves, but attribute them to Küçükköy as these are Alafaredin kilims. And they were smiling like, why do you attribute those kilims to us? And believe me, people coming from Küçükköy were very angry about the fact that those kilims are mentioned as Varsak kilims, and they were just asking us, who said that? Who just invented this idea of Varsak? Those kilims are belonging to us. So we can officially, obviously see a tribal identity or a weaving identity embraced and owned by them, and they don't want to just leave it to the other people to own it. And this emotional part of the study was pretty meaningful. So Circassians inhabited Yelema village, from whose mosque the oldest examples of these kilim come from, claim those kilims were in their mosque before their arrival to the area. The Alafaredin kilim coming from Küçükköy is most probably invented, developed, and only seen and woven in this village, and wrongly named Varsak because of its geographical closeness to the only village with the tribal name remained till today. And I would like you to think about all of those historical flows about many, many tribes of Turkmen in Anatolia, ending up here, there, relocating, resettling, joining, separating from each other. And because of this, in Anatolian kilims, we have so many different types, so many varieties, and so many diversification. So when you observe the historical flow and matching it with the kilim weaving, let's say, ethnographical part of it, this is very understandable to have the diversity of kilims in Anatolia. So just to correct a mistake, this is an early Alafaredin kilim, of Anatolia region belonging to mid-19th century. So thank you very much for listening to me. Hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, that's it.
On behalf of not only the New England Rug Society, but all of us in the audience, thank you so much, Deniz.
I thank you for this opportunity.
That was fascinating, not only about the subject, the so-called Varsak Kilims, but how you do field research and how you pursued the true village attribution for these very particular kilims.
Thank you very much.
We have some questions about the basics of who were the Turkmen and where did the Turkmen come from? And if you could help answer that question, first of all, where did the Turkmen people come from originally?
So they came from the Central Asia, and they were living in the west part of Central Asia during the 8th and 9th century. Due to climate change and overpopulated people, a very good, or let's say the majority of Turkmen decided to move towards the west of Asia and ending up in Anatolia towards the 11th century. And they had, in the beginning, a totally nomadic life. And due to the political, geographical, let's say, historical facts, they gradually had a settled life in Turkey.
The Mongolians, were they originally from Mongolia and restricted to Mongolia?
So the Mongolians, in the flow of history, some of them became Muslim, and we called them Ilkhanids. And then from the Ilkhanids, Tamerlane, who was claiming that he was the grandchild of Genghis Khan, Tamerlane built or founded the Timurids, and they were Mongols having a heavy, if you want, military population within their army as Turkic people, but the rulers were Mongolian, converted to the Islam in the 12th century mainly, and they invaded the land because Tamerlane was imitating Genghis Khan. So Tamerlane didn't stay here and turned back to Central Asia, and his grave is now in Uzbekistan. And Uzbek people embrace, if you want, the heritage of cultural identity of Tamerlane as their ancestral personality.
Thank you. We have a question about other non-Turkmen tribal groups around Sivas, and I'd like to broaden that to include just touching on a complicated and even sometimes controversial subject about other non-Turkmen groups in Anatolia.
So there were remainings of Phrygians. I mean, if we are talking about the Anatolian Peninsula as a generic meaning, Phrygians, Lydians who invented the money for the first time, Lycians who live around Antalya, the remaining part of Hittites, Armenians, the Hellenized Roman citizens that we call Greeks, basically because they were later on speaking in Greek language, are non-Turkic part of the community, and their cultural identity is now very much mixed in the Turkic one who came later on, and it became, if you want, an amalgam of the indigenous, and later on came Turkic or Turkish culture.
Thank you. Touching back on the earlier part of your presentation and your maps, you showed the cities, the medieval cities of the Levant, and talked about the open spaces in between, and what peoples were living in those open areas. Obviously very few, but were there any in particular?
Not really. We have some documents of Byzantines who were ruling over the land as a political power, but they had different, let's say, subjects in different ethnicities. We knew that Armenians were dealing both with animal husbandry and agricultural activities in the rural area, but in the city centers, they were dealing with artisanship, and they're still a very talented artisan groups of Armenians living in Turkey. And so the farming activities were limited and were just around the citadel walls because people were not feeling safe, and the population was not enough to fill up the emptiness in between two main cities.
You also talked about the I'm trying to think of a more neutral word than persecution, but that the Turkmen had supported Tamerlane, and the Ottomans were unhappy with that. But were not the Ottomans also of Turkmen origin?
So the Ottomans were having their ancestry based on Kayu tribe, and Kayu was one of the 24 branches of Oghuz. And we know that the first and the second Ottoman Sultan has been born in tents. But after the second Sultan, whose name is Orhan, they preferred to have a settled life, because settled life means the political power over the others, the power of regulating and arranging things going on around. So the other tribes remained for a long time, or preferred to remain as nomad as possible for the longest time possible, where Ottoman was opposing them, or let's say pressuring them to have a settled life, because if you're not settled, you don't give tax, you don't give people to form the military force, and you're uncontrollable. You can revolt, you can join your forces with others, and so you can create troubles where no established state would accept this.
So in every webinar, we always talk some about animals and
Right.
sheep in particular, but you showed us some goats in the distance. Can you tell us a little bit more about the animals that were herded?
Okay, so I will try to explain the subject in a historical flow. Before the Ottoman pressure went to an unbearable degree for Yörüks, for nomads, Yörüks were generally feeding sheep but not goats. After the Industrial Revolution, England and Ottomans has a treaty, and in this treaty, the British people wanted the closest possibility to their land to have the cotton agriculture, and this was the Ottoman land. So they made an agreement with the Ottomans, and Ottomans banned the nomadic activities in the land. Then people living in the plains, the nomads, were obligatory going to the mountains during the summertime and the wintertime, and the sheep substituted with goats. Those goats are very durable to the harsh life conditions, have long hairs to be spun and woven some tents, and let's say functional weedings more suitable for the nomadic daily activities, like saddlebags or like bands to keep the tent and so. But there has been a change towards the goat beginning from the sheep, and most of the nomads ended up having goats rather than sheep.
So let's move from the animals to the carpets, if you would. You showed us some interesting examples of the so-called Varsak Kilims, and certainly that first one, the old one, which had some what I would call classic. You may speak more eloquently and with more knowledge than I, but some classic Anatolian motifs of diamonds and hooks, which are used all over Anatolia. And so how did you identify that as a Varsak Kilim, and might Kilims with and even carpets with those same motifs be from other areas?
So, interestingly, in order to answer this question, we should compare two types of kilims. So the whole Varsak people weave a similar prototype of kilim, but the Antalya one, which was not Varsak actually, weaves a very different one, very similar, very comparable if you want, to the pattern of Kyrgyz reed screen that we call chi. So if you turn a Varsak kilim 90 degree and make a horizontal something, you will basically see a pattern of almost identical Kyrgyz reed screen, which seems the pixels to form the visual identity of the kilim is much bigger. So you have some steps going around these diagonal angles, and the color range is always the same. Dark red, like almost cherry, dark blue, not a light blue, a very like olive green, but rare in the early examples, and always usage of white as the inside of small diamonds. So it is very typical, and it's only coming from one or two villages already, which is quite normal to understand about the rarity of those kinds.
It's a lot of subtlety, isn't there, in understanding the patterns of where things are woven. I was struck listening to you by the field work, and this is the first time in a webinar we've had someone speak about conducting that field work. It seems very important. And you were speaking with people who were older. You emphasized that several of your colleagues already have left us. And tell us about that. Is the time passing to do this work?
Yes. So I still do believe very much on the field work, even though those people you have seen are not weaving the exact kilim that we search for, are not even having the exact kilim that we search for in their chest or warehouse or in their village, in their life. They have those kilims in their memory. So it is very important. It is very important if you want to evoke them, to provide them, to put their knowledge on the table. I mean, I do believe personally that we have a very Orientalist approach to examine those kilims from where we live in, etc. But going there and having the information coming directly from the weaver, directly from the grandchildren of the weavers of those antique ones, is totally something very valuable and very different. And I still do believe that the field research is, if you want, not life-changing, but perception changing of a rugged person. So because of this, maybe I emphasize always making tours here and there and catch the authenticity, because we have for sure a limited time for those people to make those people speak about. We have maybe 10 years, 20 years more, and then there will be no one left over. So we have a hurry, and I still do count very much on the field research as we have pictures, visual material in our hand, now in digitals, etc. This is an opportunity to make them speak, to make them reveal what they have in their memory, in their mind.
When you go to these villages, and I know you travel and lead tours, I hope one day to join one of your tours. I hear the one that you led in conjunction with Holly and ICOC was wonderful. When you visit these villages, are there young people weaving today in traditional ways?
Yes and no. In traditional ways, somehow, because technically they learn how to weave from their generally grandmother and not mothers, because their mothers have a field work. The grandmother have a spare time to teach the grandchild. So first of all, this is coming from one generation back. The second activity is the weaving activities of these youngsters, if you want, are much more commercial or commercially purposed. But the technical properties of their weaving, how they make the knot, how they put the weft, etc., is totally coming from the older generation and belonging to a limited area. So we still have the bound of the techniques with the area. Not necessarily the visual aspect, but the technical aspect will always remain the same, or let's say dedicated to a certain area.
Last question, and I may not be able to pronounce this correctly.
Okay.
Can we say that Eshme or Ushak Kilims are related to Varsak Kilims due to their motif pattern and color palette?
Historically, not really. Ushak and Eshme have other tribal affiliations who came from other places, and Varsak was one of the rarer examples that we have documented people living first in Sivas and ending up in North Anatolia in a course of 1 century almost.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A fascinating talk today, and thank you for taking the time to answer questions and for being with us from Istanbul. Deniz.
Well, I thank you personally, New England Grass Society, to provide me this opportunity, and our audience who just watched us with interest and very good questions. I'm really happy to answer to them.
Thank you to everyone who joined us, and goodbye.
Bye.